March 6, 1944, high above Berlin, where the air thins and frost paints the edges of canopies, the roar of engines shattered the silence. The 56th Fighter Group of the United States Army Air Forces had just met the Luftwaffe in what would become one of the most ferocious aerial battles ever fought over Europe. Below them, the city burned under the relentless pounding of American bombers. Above, the sky was a knife fight at 28,000 feet. The German fighters, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, had played this game before. They knew their escape by heart. Climb. Every engagement ended the same way. When pressed by American Thunderbolts, they would pull their slender machines upward in near-vertical climbs. The heavy American fighters, starved of lift, would stall, falter, and fall away. For a year, that tactic had been gospel, but on this day, it failed. The Thunderbolts did not drop away. They followed. They climbed with them, relentless, impossible, and lethal. And when the Luftwaffe pilots looked back, the grey noses of the P-47s were still there, closing in. Gunfire stitched across the sky. Black trails marked German fighters tumbling into the cloud layers below. By the end of that mission, 11 enemy aircraft had been destroyed. Not a single Thunderbolt was lost. The balance of power in Europe's skies had just shifted, and few yet understood why. The reason wasn't a new engine, nor a radical redesign. It was something far simpler, a change in shape, a new propeller. The wide, muscular blades now spinning at the front of every Thunderbolt had transformed the aircraft from a brute of limited agility into a predator that could fight vertically, climb aggressively, and stay locked on its enemy's tail through maneuvers once thought impossible. This transformation had begun a year earlier, not in combat, but in laboratories and wind tunnels across the United States, in the offices of two rival manufacturers, Hamilton Standard and Curtiss Electric. While pilots risked their lives over Europe, engineers back home were fighting their own battle against physics. The P-47 Thunderbolt was, in many ways, an engineering paradox. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produced over 2,000 horsepower, a masterpiece of American industry, but the early Thunderbolts couldn't use that power effectively. At low speeds, especially in a climb, the aircraft felt sluggish, heavy, even clumsy. The culprit wasn't the engine, it was the propeller. The early models used a narrow blade design meant for high-speed cruise efficiency. At high velocity, those thin blades sliced through air with little drag, perfect for diving or level flight. But in a climb, when speed dropped and the air grew thicker, the propellers could not bite enough air to convert all that raw horsepower into thrust. The result was tragic. Pilots in desperate dogfights found their throttles wide open, engines screaming, but their aircraft simply refused to climb fast enough. By the winter of 1943, the issue was no longer theoretical. It was killing men. Reports from Europe described German fighters attacking bomber formations, diving through the defensive fire, then pulling up in steep climbs to safety. The Thunderbolts, trying to pursue, could not keep up. Luftwaffe pilots mocked them as the flying jug. Fast in a dive, hopeless in a climb. Some Allied commanders even questioned whether the P-47 should remain in frontline service. At Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, Long Island, the situation was dire. Chief Engineer Alexander Kartveli pored over field reports and knew the truth. The Thunderbolt was too powerful for its own propeller. The aircraft's engine could deliver thrust that the blades simply couldn't translate into motion. The solution seemed simple: make the blades wider. But that change was far from easy. A propeller is more than just a fan, it's an aerodynamic sculpture. Every curve, every degree of twist affects performance, balance, and vibration. A miscalculated design could tear the engine from its mounts or shatter the gearbox. Engineers had to craft blades strong enough to withstand thousands of revolutions per minute, yet light enough to respond to split-second pitch changes in flight. Two companies set out to solve the problem. Curtiss-Wright, the maker of the original propeller, began working on a wider paddle blade design that retained the elegant curvature of the old model, but with much greater surface area. Hamilton Standard, a major supplier for other American aircraft, took a bolder approach. A propeller with nearly rectangular blades that looked almost crude, but appearances were deceiving. Wind tunnel tests proved what theory had suggested. The broad, paddle-shaped blades produced far greater thrust at low speeds, especially during climbs, while sacrificing very little at high velocity. They grabbed the air like an oar through water. Engineers watching the test understood immediately this was the breakthrough. By April 1943, both companies shipped prototypes to Republic Aviation for testing. Pilots began flying side-by-side comparisons at the Wright Field, proving grounds. The results stunned them. Climb rate improvements were dramatic. The Thunderbolt, once sluggish above 10,000 feet, now surged upward with power to spare. Its takeoff roll shortened, its acceleration sharpened, and its ceiling climbed higher. For the first time, the aircraft felt eager to fly. Neither company's design was perfect, but both were revolutionary. The Army Air Forces, unwilling to delay production for fine distinctions, made a pragmatic decision: approve both. Hamilton Standard's hydraulic propeller would be fitted to new Thunderbolts built in New York. Curtiss Electric's version would be installed at the Evansville, Indiana plant and shipped overseas as retrofit kits. In June 1943, production began. By the end of the year, the first paddle-blade Thunderbolts were crossing the Atlantic. At bases across England, mechanics worked through freezing December nights, replacing the old propellers one by one. Each assembly weighed more than 600 pounds and required precise calibration. But as soon as the engines turned, the difference was obvious. Pilots who had flown the P-47 for months could feel it instantly. A smoother response, a stronger pull, a new eagerness in the climb. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, the famed Zemke's Wolf Pack, understood what this meant. For months his men had been forced to fight on the defensive, using dives and high-speed passes to compensate for poor climb performance. Now, everything had changed. He began rewriting the group's combat doctrine from the ground up. Through January 1944, the pilots trained intensively to master the new flight envelope. They practiced spiral climbs, high-angle pursuits, and aggressive vertical maneuvers that would have stalled the old Thunderbolts. Zemke encouraged his men to think three-dimensionally, to fight not just in circles but in layers of altitude, using the P-47's massive power to control the vertical battlefield. By early February, the transformation was complete. The 56th Fighter Group, equipped entirely with paddle-blade Thunderbolts, took to the skies. Their first missions proved the difference immediately. German fighters that once escaped by climbing now found themselves caught in the sights of pursuing Thunderbolts that refused to fall away. On March 6, 1944, during the mission to Brunswick and Berlin, that transformation was tested in full-scale combat. The Luftwaffe scrambled more than 80 fighters to intercept the American bombers. The sky became a whirlpool of vapor trails, tracer fire, and smoke. Thunderbolts and Focke-Wulfs tangled in climbing spirals thousands of feet above the clouds. But this time, the outcome was reversed. Veterans like Francis Gabby Gabreski, Robert Johnson, and Walker Mahurin described the same astonishment. Their aircraft simply stayed with the enemy. In the vertical chase, the P-47 no longer lost energy. It carried momentum upward, climbing with ferocity. Within minutes, the Wolfpack had torn through the German formations. 11 enemy aircraft went down. Not a single Thunderbolt failed to return. The Luftwaffe was stunned. Pilots who survived insisted they must have faced a new American fighter, perhaps an early P-51 Mustang variant. But intelligence reports and gun camera footage told a different story. The enemy they had fought was the same jug they had mocked, now reborn with strength they couldn't understand. German engineers soon recovered wreckage of a downed Thunderbolt and noticed the strange broad blades. A technical report followed, noting the difference but misjudging its purpose. They believed it was meant to improve takeoff performance, not combatability. That mistake bought the Allies precious time. As weeks passed, more P-47 units in England began receiving their paddle blade upgrades. The 4th Fighter Group, the 78th, and others transitioned through February and March. Each reported the same transformation. Climb performance soared. Energy retention in vertical combat improved dramatically. The Luftwaffe's tried-and-true tactics began to crumble. During Big Week, the massive Allied offensive against German aircraft factories in late February 1944, the results became undeniable. Over 6 days of relentless aerial warfare, American fighter groups flew more than 3,000 sorties. The Thunderbolts, now capable of meeting the enemy in the climb, decimated German defences. Over 300 Luftwaffe fighters were destroyed, for the loss of fewer than 30 American aircraft. The change in numbers mirrored a deeper shift in psychology. For the first time, American bomber crews looked up and saw their escorts not lagging behind but fighting above them, pushing the enemy back before they could reach the formations. In mess halls and briefing tents, pilots spoke of the new propeller as if it were magic. In truth, it was something more profound, an engineering triumph that turned the tide of air power through precision and speed, not reinvention. Behind every victory was a machine shop, a draftsman's table, a shipment of forged aluminum blades arriving from Connecticut or Indiana. The war in the air was being decided not just by pilots, but by engineers who understood that even a small change in geometry could alter the course of battle. By the spring of 1944, the skies over Europe were changing colour, not literally, but in dominance. The silver shapes of American fighters now filled the upper altitudes where German eagles once ruled. Every new squadron arriving from the States seemed to carry that same defiant hum of confidence, powered by the paddle blade propellers that had turned the Thunderbolt from a lumbering brute into a lethal climber. For the Luftwaffe, the shock was immediate and disorienting. Their entire doctrine, built around the vertical superiority of their Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts, was unravelling in front of them. Pilots tried to adapt, pulling into level escapes or diving away instead of climbing, but even those manoeuvres were no longer safe. The Thunderbolts could dive faster than any German aircraft in the sky, and now climb well enough to trap them on the rebound. At Luftwaffe headquarters, confusion bordered on disbelief. Reports flooded in from squadrons claiming the Americans had introduced a new type of fighter. Engineers combed through the wreckage of downed Thunderbolts looking for clues, but the answer, a redesigned propeller, seemed too trivial to explain such a sweeping transformation. Yet, in war, small details often decide the fate of great powers. Through March and April 1944, the number of American fighter groups equipped with the new propeller increased dramatically. The 4th, 56th, 78th, and others reported kill ratios climbing with each mission. German losses mounted. Tactics that once ensured escape now led pilots straight into the guns of pursuing P-47s. In the skies over northern France and western Germany, the Luftwaffe was being strangled not only by superior numbers, but by superior engineering. Colonel Hubert Zemke's Wolfpack became the testbed for new tactics born from these capabilities. Instead of fighting level dogfights, Zemke taught his men to dominate the vertical plane, to think of the sky as a spiral rather than a circle. Using the massive power of the R2800 engine and the thrust of the new blades, his pilots learned to convert speed into altitude, storing energy and height, then diving back with gravity's help to attack. One manoeuvre became legendary among them, the climbing spiral. Major Francis Gabreski perfected it. When facing a German fighter at co-altitude, he would pull into a steady climbing turn, tempting his opponent to follow. In the old Thunderbolt, such a move would have been suicide. The aircraft would bleed energy and stall. But with the paddle blade propeller, the P-47 could keep climbing. The German, lighter but underpowered in the thin air, would struggle to follow. 2 turns, maybe 3, and Gabreski would reverse the spiral into a dive. The enemy, now slow and exposed, would fill his gun sight. In just a few months, Gabreski became America's top ace in the European theatre, with 28 confirmed victories, all in the Thunderbolt. He credited not his marksmanship or luck, but the propeller. Without it, he said, half of those kills would have been impossible. The statistics reflected his experience. During the first months of 1944, before the new propeller became standard, American fighters achieved a kill ratio of around 2-1 against the Luftwaffe. By summer, that ratio had more than doubled. It wasn't just the Mustang that ruled the skies. The Thunderbolt had become a monster. Big Week had already crippled German aircraft production, but what followed was annihilation in the air. By May, the Allies had air superiority over France. Now the stage was set for the most ambitious military operation of the war, Operation Overlord. In the weeks leading to D-Day, the Thunderbolts were everywhere. They bombed rail yards, strafed convoys, and destroyed airfields. When German fighters scrambled to intercept, they found themselves outmatched in every direction. The paddle blade Thunderbolt could dive, climb, and fight at any altitude. What had been a defensive escort a year before had become a weapon of domination. On June 6, 1944, as Allied ships poured across the English Channel and the beaches of Normandy erupted in chaos, the P-47s flew overhead in relentless waves. They intercepted what little opposition the Luftwaffe could muster, barely 100 sorties. The Americans flew nearly 9,000. The Luftwaffe had been broken, its once fearsome pilots now grounded by fuel shortages and the terrifying realization that their enemies' machines had surpassed theirs in every measurable way. The Thunderbolts' transformation was more than tactical, it was symbolic. It represented how the Allies fought the war, not by designing miracles from scratch, but by improving what already existed and doing so at industrial scale. Within months, two separate American companies had designed, tested, and mass-produced two versions of an entirely new propeller system, shipped thousands across the Atlantic, and retrofitted combat aircraft in the field, all without interrupting operations. It was innovation at speed, powered by industry. Even as the Mustangs began taking over the deep escort missions, the Thunderbolt remained the workhorse of the Allied air forces. Its improved propeller gave it a second life as a fighter bomber. With the extra thrust, it could now carry over a ton of bombs and rockets without losing performance. At low altitude, where missions were most dangerous, that thrust meant survival. Pilots could dive in to strike trains or tanks, then pull out sharply before anti-aircraft fire found them. Between April and September 1944, Thunderbolts flew over 80,000 ground attack sorties, with a loss rate of less than 1%, an extraordinary figure for aircraft so often in the line of fire. The same propeller that had changed dogfighting now made close air support possible on a scale no other fighter could match. Over Normandy, Falaise and the Ardennes, soldiers on the ground learned to recognize the heavy, deep growl of the P-47's engine. When that sound filled the sky, it meant safety. It meant help. As the months passed, the Luftwaffe continued to bleed. Its veteran pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced, and the replacements, poorly trained, underfueled, and terrified, stood no chance. The Luftwaffe still had aircraft on paper, but without fuel, without experienced pilots, and without the energy advantage that had once been their trump card, they were ghosts. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 was their last desperate throw. For a few days, weather grounded Allied aircraft, giving the Germans a fleeting sense of hope. But when the clouds cleared, the Thunderbolts and Mustangs returned in force. In just 2 weeks, the Allies flew thousands of sorties. P-47s with their paddle blade propellers swept across the Ardennes, shredding German armour and supply convoys from the air. When German fighters rose to protect their troops, they were shot down almost to extinction. By February 1945, the Luftwaffe's ability to contest the air was over. The success of the paddle blade Thunderbolt wasn't about glamour. It wasn't a secret weapon or a miracle of design. It was a lesson in applied engineering, in solving problems with precision and urgency. The new propeller didn't just change the aircraft's performance, it changed how America fought the air war. Instead of waiting years to develop entirely new planes, they fixed what was broken, enhanced what worked, and pushed improvements into the field faster than the enemy could react. That speed of adaptation became one of the Allied war machine's greatest strengths. When German engineers studied the captured Thunderbolts, they understood immediately what had been done. They even had the technical capacity to design similar propellers. But they lacked what mattered most: time, materials, and industrial bandwidth. Retooling an entire production system for a new propeller meant stopping the lines, testing, recertifying aircraft, and retraining crews. Things Germany could no longer afford. The Allies could change, Germany could not. That, in the end, was the difference between survival and collapse. By late 1944, the paddle blade Thunderbolt had become a symbol of American ingenuity. It wasn't the fastest or the prettiest fighter, but it was one of the most effective weapons ever built. It could take punishment that would destroy other aircraft, dive faster than any opponent, and now climb like a hawk. From escort missions to ground attacks, from Berlin to Bastogne, the Thunderbolt did everything asked of it, and more. When the war finally ended in May 1945, the P-47 had earned its reputation. Pilots called it the Jug, a name once spoken with irony, but now with affection. The Luftwaffe, in its post-war reflections, regarded it with wary respect. Ace Günther Rall, who survived over 270 victories, later admitted that once the Americans introduced the paddle blade propeller, the Thunderbolt was no longer slow, it was dangerous. The irony is that this revolution, This decisive change in the balance of air power came not from a weapon, but from a curve of metal no larger than a man's arm. Yet those blades, forged from aluminum, shaped by draftsmen's pencils and tested in winter air tunnels, became the edge of Allied air supremacy. By the time jet engines appeared on the horizon, the world had already moved beyond propellers. Most of the Thunderbolts were scrapped, melted down, or sold to foreign air forces. The stories of the engineers who built those paddle blade propellers faded quietly into history. But for a brief, defining moment, their work had changed everything. By early 1945, the skies above Germany no longer belonged to the Reich. From the ruins of Cologne to the smoking fields of the Ruhr, Allied fighters prowled freely. What had begun 2 years earlier as a desperate technical fix had evolved into a demonstration of how engineering, industry and adaptation could win a war. The paddle blade propeller became a symbol of that philosophy. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't inspire propaganda posters, but it embodied the one trait that Germany could no longer match: the ability to learn fast and build faster. At the heart of that success was a network of American factories that operated like a single, synchronized organism. In Connecticut and Indiana, the assembly lines at Hamilton Standard and Curtiss-Wright produced thousands of gleaming aluminum blades every month. Each was forged, milled, polished, and balanced with precision that bordered on obsession. Every set of 4 blades was tested for harmonics, mounted to its hub, and stamped with an approval mark before being crated for the long journey across the Atlantic. A single propeller assembly weighed roughly 650 pounds and required nearly 2 full workdays of machining time. Shipping them was a logistical ballet. Wooden crates lined with felt and steel bracing filled the cargo holds of Liberty ships, each crate labelled with its destination: RAF Wartling, 8th Air Force Depot Number 2, Boxstead. Every one of those boxes carried not just metal but momentum, the quiet force of an industrial nation turning its scientific imagination into tangible power. By June 1944, more than 1,000 Thunderbolts in England had been retrofitted. Mechanics worked around the clock, their hands blackened by oil, their breath visible in the cold hangars. Each conversion took about 16 hours, but the crews didn't complain. They knew what the modification meant. Every new propeller installed was another aircraft that might bring a pilot home alive. The results spoke for themselves. By the summer of 1944, American fighter groups in Europe were achieving kill ratios of 4-to-1 or better. In the previous year, Thunderbolts had struggled to keep pace with German interceptors. Now they were hunting them. The tables had turned so completely that German commanders ordered their pilots to avoid vertical fights with the P-47 altogether. For the Luftwaffe, that was the final admission of defeat in the realm they once ruled. Behind those statistics lay a principle that would define modern warfare: incremental innovation at industrial scale. The United States didn't need to invent an entirely new aircraft. It just needed to make an existing one work to its potential, and to do it faster than the enemy could react. In 9 months, engineers, manufacturers and the military had conceived, tested, produced and deployed a modification that rewrote the rulebook of air combat. German designers knew the theory just as well. They could have widened their own propellers, altered pitch control, or refined materials. But by 1944, Germany lacked the time, fuel, and manufacturing flexibility to implement such changes. Their production lines were already straining under bombing raids and resource shortages. Stopping them to redesign a component, even one as vital as a propeller, would have meant grounding entire squadrons. That difference, the ability to change without collapsing, was what separated the Allies from the Axis. The Thunderbolt's metamorphosis also reshaped tactics on the ground. The aircraft's newfound power at low speed gave it extraordinary range as a fighter bomber. Pilots could now carry 2,000 pounds of ordnance, rockets, or external tanks without feeling sluggish. In the hedgerows of Normandy and the forests of Belgium, soldiers came to rely on the unmistakable thunder of radial engines diving out of the clouds. To the troops below, the Jug wasn't just an airplane, it was deliverance. By the autumn of 1944, the Thunderbolt had proven itself in every conceivable role: escort, interceptor, and ground attacker. In the same months that the Allies prepared their final drive into Germany, P-47s destroyed thousands of locomotives, tanks, and trucks. Each mission eroded the mobility of the German army and starved its divisions of supplies. The Luftwaffe, trying desperately to respond, was a shadow of its former self. Fuel shortages kept many of its aircraft grounded, while those that did fly often fell victim to Thunderbolts waiting above their airfields. Then came December 1944, the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. For the first week, snow and fog blinded the skies, giving the Germans a brief advantage. But when the weather cleared on December 23rd, the response was immediate and merciless. Waves of Thunderbolts roared over the front lines, their paddle blade propellers clawing at the cold winter air. They bombed convoys, strafed tanks, and severed supply routes. In just 3 days, Allied air power shattered the offensive. German armour that had reached the Meuse was reduced to burning wrecks. The Luftwaffe tried to intervene, sending its remaining fighters into the air, but their efforts only accelerated the inevitable. Outclimbed, outgunned, and outnumbered, they fell in droves. By February 1945, the once formidable air arm of the Reich had ceased to function as a coherent force. When victory finally came in May, the Thunderbolt stood as one of the unsung heroes of the Allied campaign. It had destroyed nearly 4,000 German aircraft in air-to-air combat, and another 4,000 on the ground. An astonishing record for a fighter once dismissed as too heavy for dogfighting. Yet even as celebrations began, the next revolution was already arriving. Jet engines were rewriting the laws of flight, and propellers, even revolutionary ones, were about to become relics. Most Thunderbolts were sold off or scrapped. A few found second lives in foreign air forces flying into the 1950s, but their glory years had passed. The engineers who had designed the paddle blade propeller moved on to other projects, their contribution largely forgotten outside specialist circles. But their achievement endured in principle. They had proven that technology doesn't need to be radical to be decisive. Sometimes progress comes from simply understanding a machine well enough to make it better. The story of the paddle blade Thunderbolt became a case study in military engineering. It showed that victory could come not from grand inventions, but from speed, adaptation, and the courage to make practical changes when theory suggested perfection was still years away. That mindset, solve the problem now, perfect it later, became a cornerstone of American military innovation for decades to come. Even in the jet age, the lessons persisted. Engineers designing turbine blades, helicopter rotors, and drone propellers still wrestle with the same balance between surface area, efficiency, and strength that confronted the teams at Hamilton Standard and Curtiss Electric in 1943. The physics haven't changed, only the materials have. From the German perspective, the saga of the Thunderbolt carried a darker moral. Their scientists and engineers understood the problem perfectly, but they were trapped inside an industrial machine that could no longer pivot. The Reich's obsession with perfection, its centralized control and its collapsing resource base, meant that even when they identified flaws, they couldn't correct them fast enough. They built brilliant machines in theory, jet fighters, guided missiles, revolutionary concepts, but too late, in too few numbers, and without the fuel to fly them. The Allies, by contrast, treated engineering as an extension of logistics. If a fix worked, it was implemented immediately. If it didn't, it was discarded just as fast. That pragmatic approach, multiplied across thousands of projects, radar, fuel chemistry, engine tuning, propeller design, produced an unstoppable cumulative advantage. Each small success fed into the next, until the Axis simply couldn't keep up. The paddle blade propeller was one of those quiet successes. It didn't win the war alone, but it changed the tempo of the air war at a critical moment. In the winter of 1943, the Luftwaffe could still meet the Allies on equal terms. By the summer of 1944, that balance had vanished. The Thunderbolt's climb, acceleration and endurance gave Allied pilots dominance over Western Europe's skies, and that dominance made D-Day possible. Without air superiority, no invasion could have succeeded. In the end, the story circles back to those March skies over Berlin, to the moment when German pilots, trusting their old escape maneuver, pulled into steep climbs and saw, to their horror, the same American fighters still on their tails. They didn't know what had changed. They couldn't have imagined that the difference between life and death was hidden in the curve of a blade. That is how wars are truly won, not by miracles, but by margins. By the engineers who work unseen, the machinists who forge those margins into metal, and the mechanics who bolt them onto aircraft in frozen hangars. Each small improvement, Each incremental advantage accumulates until it becomes decisive. The P-47 Thunderbolt, once an overweight brawler, became a precision instrument of air power because someone, somewhere, refused to accept that good enough was good enough. They looked at a propeller and saw potential. They changed the shape of its blades, and in doing so they helped shape the outcome of a world war. When historians recount the great innovations of World War II, radar, jet engines, nuclear power, the paddle blade propeller rarely earns a mention. But for the men who flew with it, it was nothing less than salvation. It turned the sky itself into an ally. And perhaps that is the real legacy of the Thunderbolt, a reminder that progress is often invisible until the moment it changes everything.